911 emergency.
I think I need to report a break-in and a murder. My wife is on the floor, bloody, stiff, not moving.
When's the last time you saw her? All right, did you go good? Take a deep breath.
I'm a fireman. I was at work yesterday, so I saw her about 36 hours ago, I guess. She was lying on the floor. Okay. She was covered in blood. I just want to die.
What shift did you work yesterday?
A 24-hour shift.
On the morning of September 29th, 2012, George Tiaffay, a respected Las Vegas firefighter and West Point graduate, arrived at his estranged wife's townhouse with their 8-year-old daughter Maddie. They intended to pick up some belongings. Upon arrival, George noticed the garage door was unusually open. Concerned, he entered the home and discovered a scene that would forever alter their lives. Welcome back to Chilling Fireside Stories, where I tell true crime stories with the utmost care and respect for the victims and bearable for my community. If you haven't already, please subscribe. It truly helps me continue bringing these important stories to you. These cases deserve to be remembered. Now, settle in and let's begin. This is the story of Shauna Tiaffay, a woman whose warmth, positivity, and infectious smile left an indelible mark on everyone she met. Born Shauna and Castleton on March 13, 1966 in Salt Lake City, Utah, she was the daughter of William and Nancy Castleton. Raised in the Mormon faith alongside her sister Paula, who emerges as a powerful, inspirational figure in Shauna's story, and her 5 brothers, family was the core of Shauna's upbringing. In 1978, the Castleton family moved to Pennsylvania for 2 years before eventually settling in Northern Virginia. Despite these relocations, which could have been challenging for any young girl, Shauna thrived. Her natural charisma and bubbly personality drew people to her effortlessly. A glass-half-full kind of person who inspired those around her to see the brighter side of life. In 1994, at the age of 28, Shauna set her sights on Las Vegas, a bold move that perfectly matched her vibrant spirit. She began her career in the city's high-end retail industry, working in the cosmetics departments at Saks Fifth Avenue and Neiman Marcus. Yet, it was the lively, fast-paced world of cocktail waitressing where Shauna truly found her calling. After joining the Fiesta Casino as a cocktail waitress, she later landed a position at the Palms Hotel and Casino when it opened in 2001. This became her professional home for the next 11 years. Shauna's magnetic personality and work ethic made her a natural in the hospitality industry. Her coworkers at the Palms recall never seeing her without a smile, describing her as the most positive person they'd ever met. Her dedication to her craft earned her a remarkable income. By the early 2000s, Shauna was earning over $100,000 a year in salary and tips, a testament to her drive and charm. Many of her tips came in the form of casino chips from patrons who adored her. Shauna's radiant smile and upbeat personality made her unforgettable, and her interactions with people introduced her to someone who would forever change the course of her life, George Tiaffay. George was the embodiment of charm and confidence, a handsome firefighter with an all-American appeal that instantly captivated Shauna. More than just good looks, George had an impressive background. After graduating as his high school's homecoming king and valedictorian, he attended the prestigious U.S. Military Academy at West Point. His career in the Army Corps of Engineers saw him building schools and water systems in underprivileged countries, and he consistently sent money home to support his disabled sister and help his mother care for her. To Shauna, George's dedication to service made him seem like the perfect partner, and his charisma swept her off her feet. Just a year after they met, Shauna and George welcomed a beautiful baby girl into their lives, cementing their bond as a family. Friends and loved ones saw them as the quintessential, perfect couple. George appeared to dote on his wife and daughter, while Shauna seemed overjoyed to embrace motherhood, a role she had always dreamed of. Her daughter became her greatest priority, and she poured her heart into being the best mom she could be. Shauna's fun-spirited personality made every moment with her daughter special, filled with laughter, play, and love. In March 2006, 3 years after the birth of their daughter, Shauna and George celebrated their union with a private wedding ceremony in Hawaii, just days after Shauna's 40th birthday. Photographs from the ceremony captured smiles and happiness, images of a family that seemed picture-perfect. But even the most radiant smiles can hide cracks beneath the surface. In the years following their wedding, life began to take a dark turn. The 2008 recession hit George and Shauna hard, eroding their finances and straining their marriage. George became bitter, jealous, and angry, a stark contrast to the loving husband Shauna had once adored. He grew demeaning and critical, even calling her names in front of their young daughter, a moment Shauna shared with her friends as particularly hurtful and humiliating. Their financial troubles seemed to magnify George's insecurities, as he resented Shauna's role as the primary breadwinner. His controlling nature extended to her spending habits, fueling tension and conflict within their household. As the months and years passed, the problems between them only worsened. Shauna's growing unease wasn't limited to her marriage. It extended to the people George surrounded himself with. While befriending others in need is typically an admirable trait, one individual George hired for odd jobs around their homes sparked intense fear in Shauna. She described the man as creepy to friends and family, sharing how uncomfortable she felt being left alone with him and her daughter. It wasn't his homelessness that unsettled her, but his behavior and demeanor, a chilling intuition that Shauna couldn't shake. She repeatedly told George how uncomfortable she felt with the man he had hired to work around their home. She expressed how his presence made her feel unsafe, especially when she was alone with their daughter. But George dismissed her concerns entirely, showing little regard for her unease and refusing to validate her feelings. His indifference became another painful addition to the growing list of issues that plagued their marriage, and it left Shauna feeling isolated in her own home, a place that should have been her sanctuary. Despite the love she had poured into their relationship, Shauna was deeply hurt by George's behavior. George's demeaning words, his controlling behavior, and his failure to show care for her pushed Shauna to an agonizing realization: the life she had hoped for was no longer attainable. By April 2012, Shauna had reached her breaking point. Their marriage was crumbling, and in a decision filled with sorrow, she moved out of their family home. They agreed to split custody of their daughter, but even then, Shauna wasn't ready to give up entirely. She held on to hope, suggesting marriage counseling in the summer of 2012. Yet by that time, it was too late. The damage to their relationship was irreparable. Still, Shauna carried on with unwavering resilience. She focused on building a new life for herself and her daughter, settling into a townhouse in Summerlin, Nevada, while continuing to work long hours at the Palms Casino. Shauna's positive outlook helped her adapt, even as she adjusted to the challenges of single parenthood and late-night shifts. But her newfound routine was shattered in early September 2012, when she came home from work to find her townhouse had been broken into. Among the missing items were her engagement ring, a sentimental treasure, and, disturbingly, a pair of swimsuit bottoms. The intruder had also left behind a pair of men's boxers, an eerie and unsettling clue. The violation was deeply upsetting, but ever the optimist, Shauna chose not to dwell on it. She reasoned that the likelihood of a second break-in was slim. Unfortunately, optimism couldn't shield her from what was to come. Just 3 weeks later, her home was broken into again. This time, the intruder wasn't there to steal possessions. They were waiting to steal her life. In the early hours of September 29th, Shauna was captured on security footage at the Palms Casino, clocking out of her shift at 3:01 a.m. She walked to her car and made the familiar 30-minute drive home, unaware that someone lay in wait. After pulling into her garage and entering her home, she was ambushed and brutally attacked in her stairwell. Her assailant showed no mercy, delivering blow after devastating blow until they were certain Shauna's life had ended. Her body would not be discovered until 6 hours later. That morning, George had just finished a grueling 24-hour shift at the fire station. He picked up their 8-year-old daughter from his mother's house, where she had spent the night, a common arrangement for their family given Shauna and George's demanding work schedules. For Shauna, late-night shifts as a cocktail waitress at the Palms Casino were routine, as were George's extended firefighter shifts. After picking up his daughter, George drove to Shauna's townhouse, explaining that his daughter needed something from inside. But as they approached, George noticed the garage door had been left open, a detail that immediately stood out. Entering the house with their daughter, George was confronted with a horrifying sight: Shauna's lifeless body, badly beaten, lying on the living room floor. George quickly ushered his daughter outside to shield her from the gruesome scene and called 911.
911 emergency.
I think I need to report a break-in and a murder. My wife is on the floor, bloody, stiff, not moving.
His voice, filled with shock and panic, broke as he described what he'd found. As emergency responders arrived, they were struck by the severity of the attack. Shauna's injuries were so extensive that first responders initially believed she had suffered a gunshot wound to the head. Upon closer inspection, it became clear that she had been beaten repeatedly, 17 devastating blows to the head. Her broken fingers told an even more chilling story. Shauna had tried to defend herself, raising her hands in a futile attempt to protect her life. A neighbor later reported hearing a thudding sound from Shauna's home around 3:30 or 4 a.m., but assumed it was nothing unusual given her late-night routine. This detail, along with the nature of the crime, raised immediate questions. Naturally, investigators turned their attention to George as the first person of interest, especially in light of the marital problems between him and Shauna. However, George had an airtight alibi. He had been at the firehouse working a verified 24-hour shift, corroborated by multiple coworkers. With George cleared, detectives were left to piece together a disturbing puzzle. The break-in at Shauna's home just 3 weeks earlier now seemed too significant to ignore. Could it be connected to her murder? In the days following Shauna's brutal murder, investigators grappled with the possibility of who could have committed such a heinous act. Some wondered if it could have been someone who followed her home from the casino, a stalker obsessed with her, a danger that tragically isn't uncommon for those in professions like Shauna's. The speculation sent ripples of fear through her coworkers, but Shauna's sister Paula had a different theory. She believed the truth lay much closer to home. In Paula's mind, there was only one person capable of being involved: George Tiaffay. Although Paula couldn't explain how, she felt certain George had a hand in Shauna's death. She was so convinced that she called him on the very day Shauna was found.
Hello?
George?
Yes, ma'am.
This is Paula. Can you tell me what's going on?
Shauna passed away.
And what did they do to her?
I don't know. She's laying on the floor with blood.
George's response was disjointed and hesitant, and after a brief exchange, he handed the phone over to a grief counselor who had arrived at the scene. But Paula wasn't ready to be consoled. Speaking to the counselor, she confided her suspicions.
No one else can hear what I'm saying, correct?
Correct.
I have my suspicions that her husband may be involved in this, based on, many conversations I've had with my sister. I highly suspect that he may be involved.
Paula and her husband wasted no time, immediately booking a flight from Nashville to Las Vegas to support the investigation and demand answers. Meanwhile, detectives weren't letting the case grow cold. Just 48 hours into their investigation, they received a call that would change everything. The caller was a local man named William Panks, known as Big Will, and what he had to say left them stunned. Big Will explained that he had been contacted by someone who desperately wanted to meet up with him. That person was a man known as Greyhound. Someone Big Will had tried to help get back on his feet. When they met, Greyhound made a chilling confession: "I just killed a woman." What disturbed Big Will wasn't just the confession, it was the way Greyhound delivered it. He seemed proud, almost jubilant, as if he had completed a mission and wanted Big Will to be impressed. Laughing as he described how he had beaten the woman repeatedly with a hammer, Greyhound's words matched the horrific injuries investigators had observed on Shauna's body. At first, Big Will wondered if Greyhound could be exaggerating or lying. But when he heard news reports the next morning about a local woman who had been beaten to death in her home, he knew he had to go to the police. Big Will's courage in coming forward proved instrumental. He could have chosen to stay uninvolved, but instead, he did the right thing, becoming a hero in Shauna's case. Working alongside detectives, Big Will revealed that Greyhound was actually an ex-con named Noel Stevens. He also provided crucial details about Noel's whereabouts. Noel lived in a tent on the outskirts of Las Vegas, but frequented certain locations in the city, including an Albertsons grocery store, where he stole food, and a Chevron gas station. With Big Will's help, detectives headed to the gas station to see if Noel might be there. It felt like a long shot, but luck was on their side. Noel was spotted outside the Chevron station, selling substances. That gave investigators the legal grounds to take him into custody, setting the stage for unraveling the shocking truth behind Shauna's murder. Noel Stevens had always been a low-level criminal, in and out of jail for nonviolent offenses. Nothing in his history suggested he was capable of the brutal murder of Shauna. At first glance, investigators couldn't fathom why this seemingly random homeless man would target Shauna. There appeared to be no connection between them, at least, not initially. When Noel was first questioned, he denied any involvement in Shauna's murder. But his story quickly unraveled when detectives uncovered his campsite after an exhaustive search of the Las Vegas desert, using both foot patrols and helicopters. Among the items found in Noel's tent was a pair of rolled-up jeans, stained with blood. On-site testing confirmed the blood belonged to Shauna. This discovery alone was damning, but there was more. Investigators also found a price tag with a barcode linked to a hammer, the very tool they believed had been used in the attack, based on Big Will's account. While the hammer itself wasn't at the campsite, the evidence was enough to implicate Noel further. With this mounting evidence, detectives pressed Noel for a confession. They told him someone had come forward and identified him as Shauna's killer, a partial truth, as Big Will had indeed pointed to Noel, though he hadn't known Shauna was the victim. The tactic worked. Noel confessed, detailing the horrific attack on Shauna. But one question remained unanswered. Why? What motive could Noel possibly have for committing such a heinous act? The answer came when investigators searched Noel's phone. Among the call logs, one number appeared repeatedly, Shauna Tiaffay's. The connection was undeniable. Noel was the same homeless man George had hired for odd jobs around the house, the man Shauna had complained about feeling uncomfortable around. When detectives asked Noel about George, he immediately identified him as my friend, the firefighter. But simply having George's number in his phone wasn't enough to prove his involvement in the murder. After all, George had hired Noel for handyman work, so their contact could have been innocent. However, the evidence against George began to pile up. Phone records revealed that George and Noel had called each other 87 times in the month leading up to Shauna's murder, a suspiciously high number for someone hired to do occasional odd jobs. Then there was the price tag for the hammer found at Noel's campsite. Investigators traced it to a major retailer nearby and began combing through hours of surveillance footage. What they found was chilling. Video evidence of George and Noel shopping together for a hammer, ski mask, and black clothing. The footage clearly showed their faces, leaving no doubt about their identities. Presented with this evidence, Noel revealed the full extent of George's involvement. George had paid Noel $600 upfront to murder Shauna, promising thousands more once he collected on her life insurance policy. Noel described how he and George had considered various methods for the murder, ultimately deciding on a staged home invasion. The burglary 3 weeks prior had been a practice run, allowing Noel to familiarize himself with the house and steal Shauna's engagement ring to pawn for cash. Through their conversations with Noel, detectives realized he had been manipulated by George. Noel seemed to idolize George, viewing him as a charismatic and successful figure despite his financial struggles. Investigators believed George had exploited Noel's admiration, using it to coerce him into committing the unthinkable. In the months leading up to Shauna's murder, Noel Stevens had been living at his sister's house, just a few doors down from the Tiaffay family. That's how he met George. Even after Noel moved out and became homeless, George made sure to keep him around, likely many believe, because George recognized an opportunity to exploit Noel's increasingly desperate situation. Faced with mounting evidence, Nall began to tell investigators everything. He even led them to where he had buried the hammer used in the murder, a tool so violently wielded against Shauna that it had snapped in half. The details he shared were gut-wrenching. Shauna had been struck 17 times, and Nall recounted her heartbreaking final moments.
What happens when you come out that door and you're holding that hammer?
She tells me why I'm doing this.
She says, "Why are you doing this?"
Yes.
For detectives, Nall's confession left no doubt that George had a role in orchestrating this heinous crime. However, rather than arrest him immediately, investigators made the decision to inform George's mother and sister that he was now a suspect. Unsurprisingly, his family was in disbelief, adamantly defending him. They insisted it was impossible for George to have committed such a horrific act. This isn't in his nature, they told detectives. Their reaction was what anyone might expect from a family blindsided by such devastating allegations. But this choice, to notify his family before the arrest, had unintended consequences. After speaking with his mother and sister, George learned he was a suspect. Instead of waiting to face justice, he attempted to take his own life. Getting into his truck, George sped through the streets of Las Vegas, eventually crashing head-on into a cement barrier. The absence of skid marks indicated it was no accident. George survived the crash, likely because he was wearing a seatbelt. Had he succeeded, Shauna's family would have been denied the justice they desperately sought. Just 9 days after Shauna's murder, on October 8, 2012, George was arrested in his hospital bed. When officers informed him of the charges, his reaction was unsettlingly calm. He leaned back in his bed and said, "Okay." Meanwhile, back at the police station, Nall Stevens faced his own charges. For Shauna's family, the arrests were both shocking and a relief. The uncertainty that had plagued them was finally replaced with answers and the promise of justice. While nothing could undo the tragedy or bring Shauna back, the swift developments in the case offered them a glimmer of hope. 3 months after his arrest, Nall pleaded guilty to murder. In exchange, prosecutors agreed not to pursue the death penalty, but Nall would be required to testify against George, whom he had idolized. George, for his part, maintained his innocence. In August 2015, Nall took the stand as the prosecution's star witness. While he wasn't the most reliable witness, admitting under cross-examination to hallucinations, hearing voices, and a history of substance and alcohol abuse, his testimony was damning. He detailed how George had masterminded the entire plot, paying Nall $600 upfront with the promise of more once Shauna's life insurance payout came through. George provided Nall with a key to Shauna's townhouse and carefully orchestrated the crime.
Doing work for him, or is there some
friends?
What kind of things have you done together?
We worked out, stuff like that.
Make it look like a robbery.
George did. I hit her in the head.
What happens when you come out that door and you're holding that hammer?
She tells me why I'm doing this.
She says, "Why are you doing this?"
Yes.
The evidence against George was overwhelming. Investigators uncovered an unexplainable flurry of communication between George and Nall in the weeks leading up to Shauna's murder, 87 calls in just 1 month, 5 of which were placed the night before her death. This communication was far out of the ordinary, especially compared to the sporadic contact they'd had before. Add to that the damning surveillance footage showing George and Nall shopping together, purchasing the hammer that would ultimately become a murder weapon. While George's defense attempted to argue that the items were merely tools for Nall's handyman work, the jury saw the truth for what it was: George aiding and abetting Nall in his wife's murder. After 3 agonizing days of jury deliberation, the verdict was announced. George Tiaffay was found guilty on all charges. He sat emotionless as the decision was read aloud, his face a chilling mask of indifference that he had maintained throughout the entire trial. His lack of reaction was unsettling, particularly as the court relived the horrifying details of Shauna's murder. Whether innocent or guilty, his demeanor spoke volumes, leaving many, including Shauna's family, haunted by his cold detachment. Shauna's loved ones, on the other hand, wore their emotions on their sleeves. They attended the trial every day, dressed in pink, a tribute to Shauna's favorite color. Their presence was a testament to their enduring love for her and their determination to see justice served. After 3 long years of heartache and uncertainty, they could finally breathe a small sigh of relief. Justice had been served, even though nothing could ever truly heal the wounds of their loss. George was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 32 to 81 years. Noel Stevens, the man who physically carried out the murder, was sentenced to 42 years to life. Given the heinous nature of the crime, many hope he will remain behind bars for the rest of his life. Yet, even after sentencing, George's fight wasn't over. In 2017, he filed a 107-page handwritten appeal claiming ineffective counsel and incompetence to stand trial. He alleged that in the months leading up to the murder, he experienced distorted thoughts and delusions, even believing that God had instructed him to act. In his appeals, George claimed that medication-induced delusions made him believe God commanded him to kill Shauna to protect their daughter. He argued these delusions rendered him incompetent to stand trial and that his attorney failed to recognize his mental state. The courts rejected his claims, and all appeals were unsuccessful. Shauna's family remained determined to ensure the man who orchestrated her murder never walked free. Shauna and George's daughter was just 8 when she lost her mother and 11 when her father was sentenced. Her family surrounded her with love and support, helping her navigate a reality no child should endure. Now a young adult, she carries the lasting weight of unimaginable loss. Shauna's family found peace in moving her to her home state of Utah, ensuring her final resting place was closer to loved ones. A radiant soul, Shauna's life was stolen in a cruel, incomprehensible way. Her memory remains a powerful testament to her kindness, optimism, and light. If this story resonated with you, let me know by giving this video a thumbs up. It really helps me shine a light on these cases, spark conversations, and help raising awareness. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into true crime stories that matter, and share this video with someone who needs to hear Shauna's story. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay safe and look after your loved ones.